it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the middle of the fire, something like gleaming amber. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on the 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the 4 had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead wherever the Spirit would go. They went, without turning as they went. In the middle of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning issued from the fire. The living creatures darted to and fro, like a flash of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the 4 of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl. It's a kind of precious stone. And the 4 had the same form, their construction being something like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved in any of the 4 directions without veering as they moved. Their rims were tall and awesome, for the rims of all 4 were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels moved beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When they moved, the others moved. When they stopped, the others stopped. And when they rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. I know, this is weird, right? Over the heads of the living creatures, there was something like a dome, shining like crystal, spread out above their heads. Under the dome, their wings were stretched out straight, one towards another, and each of the creatures had 2 wings covering its body. When they moved, I heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of mighty waters, like the thunder of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. When they stopped, they let down their wings. And there came a voice from above the dome over their heads. When they stopped, they let down their wings. And above the dome, over their heads, there was something like a throne in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of a throne was something that seemed like a human form. Upwards from what appeared like the loins, I saw something like gleaming amber, something that looked like fire enclosed all around. And downwards from what looked like the loins, I saw something that looked like fire, and there was a splendor all around. Like the bow in a cloud on a rainy day, such was the appearance of the splendor all around. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. All right, now we're going to go to another one. This time, the prophet Zechariah. Chapter 4. Zechariah chapter 4. So you have to go a little further into your Bible, closer to the end of the Old Testament. It's the second last book of the Old Testament, is the prophet Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 4. It's one of the minor prophets. Minor not because it's less important, but minor because it's shorter than the major ones. Zechariah chapter 4. Everybody there?
Yep.
All right, Zechariah chapter 4. This is also a vision. The angel who talked with me came again and wakened me as one wakened from a sleep. He said to me, "What do you see?" And I said, I see a lampstand all of gold, with a bowl on the top of it. There are 7 lamps on it, with 7 lips on each of the lamps that are on the top of it. And by it there are 2 olive trees, one on the right of the bowl, and one other on its left. I said to the angel who talked with me, what are these, my Lord? Then the angel who talked with me answered me, do you not know what these are? I said, no, my Lord. He said to me, this is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. What are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain, and he shall bring out the top stone amid shouts of grace to it. All right, and then we'll go to Revelation chapter 4. So now you're going to hear the language that sounds very similar to what we've been reading. Revelation chapter 4. Got it? After this I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and there in heaven stood a throne, with one seated on the throne. And the one seated there looks like jasper and cornelian, and around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. Around the throne are 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones are 24 elders, dressed in white robes, with golden crowns on their heads. Coming from the throne are flashes of lightning, and rumblings and peals of thunder. And in front of the throne burn 7 flaming torches, which are the 7 spirits of God. And in front of the throne there is something like a sea of glass, like crystal. Around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature, like a lion. The second living creature, like an ox. The third living creature with a face like a human being. And the fourth living creature, like a flying eagle. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and inside. Day and night, without ceasing, they sing, Holy, 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 the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to the one who is seated on the throne and lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall before the one who is seated on the throne and worship the one who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, singing, You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. This is the word of the Lord.
Amen.
Okay, amen is right. Woo!
Amen.
So, in my life, I have probably heard maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 sermons on the book of Revelation. And usually, when people preach, they say, oh, we're going to have a series on the book of Revelation. And people are all excited. Oh, finally, we're going to finally have a series on the book of Revelation. And usually what happens is the series is on chapters 1, 2, and 3, the 7 churches, and maybe Revelation 21 and 22. And then that's it. I've heard many sermons on the churches. Because once you get into chapter 4 of the book of Revelation, things start to get a little bit weird. And we're so unfamiliar with how to read it that we avoid reading it. We don't even want to think about it. So when Gabriel mentioned to me that, oh, we're going to do a series on the book of Revelation, I was really excited, and I couldn't wait to get past the 7 churches, because we always talk about the 7 churches. Laodicea, oh, you're neither hot, you're cold, you're lukewarm. How many sermons have you heard about don't be lukewarm? Countless sermons, right? We always hear sermons on that one, because it's such a great image. But when we get to Revelation chapter 4, suddenly things are a little more, we're in strange territory. And the reason for that, I think, is because of the kind of book that Revelation is. The book of Revelation is what we call apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic is a big word. Apocalyptic is a Greek word for unveiling. So imagine a play, you're sitting, you're waiting for the play to start, and the lights are down, and it's kind of quiet, and the stage is empty, and you can see the big curtain, and then all of a sudden, the lights go up, and the curtain goes up, and behind the curtain, you see all the action start to unfold. Well, when that curtain goes up, that's like an unveiling, right? It's revealing something that was hidden. So apocalyptic literature is a kind of literature that reveals something that we couldn't see before. And I say literature because this is important. Apocalyptic literature has certain kinds of rules and certain styles that when you know the rules and you know the styles, you can recognize apocalyptic literature when you see it. So for example, when you know the rules about apocalyptic literature, when you get to the prophet Zechariah, which we just read, you can go, oh, this is apocalyptic literature. Or Ezekiel, or certain parts of the Gospel of Mark are apocalyptic. This matters because it helps us understand how to read these texts. I'm teaching a Bible and literature class at Cochin, and what we did last week was we talked about genres in the Bible. Genres are types or kinds of literature. You can have movie genres, right? There's different kinds of movies. There's horror movie, there's comedy, there's drama, right? There's different kinds of music genres. There's rock and roll, there's rap, there's jazz, right? Well, literature also has different kinds or types. And one of the things you learn when you're studying literature is that you can't read each kind of literature the same. So when we read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospel is a kind of literature that is different from apocalyptic literature. And if you try to read the Gospels and apocalyptic literature in the same way, you're going to read them both wrong. Just like you can't read the Psalms, which are poetry, the same way that you read Genesis, which is not poetry. If you read them the same way, you're going to misunderstand. Right? That's what I'm trying to get at. So when we read the book of Revelation, we're reading a kind of literature that can't be read the same way that we read other parts of the Bible. And many Christians read everything the same, so they kind of flatten everything. So they think, oh, when I read the Gospel of John, and I read Paul's letter to the Romans, I just read it the same, as if it's the same kind of literature. But it's not. So we're in apocalyptic literature, and in apocalyptic literature, there's lots of symbolism, and images, and metaphors, not things that we are to take literally, as actually happening. Right? John is having a vision, and he's trying to put that vision into words. And he's using images and metaphor that he knows from his scriptures to describe what he's seeing. And that's the other thing that's important about apocalyptic literature. Have eyes that we use to see the world. And our culture shapes the way that we see things. So the way that Koreans see the world is going to be different from the way that Canadians see the world, and the way that Chinese see the world. We see the world differently. And often what happens is our culture actually makes us blind to seeing what God is doing in the world. We become blinded. And so the book of Revelation is almost like God showing up and giving us a new pair of glasses. And suddenly, so it's sort of like God takes off our old glasses. We can't see anything. We're like, what's going on? And then God puts on new glasses, and we open our eyes, and now we see everything differently. We see it in a new way. We see the world the way God sees the world. That's what's happening in this book. That's why, when it says in chapter 4, verse 1, after this I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open. In the original language, in the Greek, and the King James Version actually does a really good job. It actually is like, after this I looked, and behold, I saw a door standing open. And the behold is like a command, right? Behold just means look, right? After this I looked, and look, a door standing open. The word look is a command. Look, hey, look. And that command happens more than any other command in the book of Revelation. The only other command that comes close to look is the command, don't be afraid. That's the second most numerous command in the book of Revelation. So all through this chapter, you're going to see the command, look. Because God wants us to see something new. See something. There's a great text in Isaiah, right, where God says through the prophet, behold, see, I am doing a new thing. See, look, I'm doing something new, right? This is what Revelation is about. Look, something new, okay? So after this, I looked. Look, there's a door. And the door is open. That's good news. It's an open door. Open means welcome. It means hospitality, right? It means things are not locked and tight and closed. When we get to Revelation chapter 22, we're going to see the new Jerusalem with 4 gates. All of the gates are open. God is an open God. God is a God who welcomes people, who wants people to come in, who doesn't try to keep people out. I see an open door. In Genesis 3, Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, and an angel is put there with a sword, saying you can't come back into the garden. That way is closed. Well, as we go through the book of Revelation, what we're seeing is that angel is gone. The way to paradise, the way to the tree of life, the way to heaven, to God's reality, is open, not closed. Now, heaven. We can do a whole series on heaven. I'm going to tell you what I think about heaven. I don't think heaven is some place up there where we play harps and we sit on clouds and we sing all day and all night. That's not how I understand heaven when I read the biblical story, right? I also don't understand heaven as the place you go when you die. As if the only thing good about heaven is way in the future, when we're dead. Then finally we get to see heaven, right? My understanding of heaven is that heaven also is a kind of metaphor, a kind of symbol that means God's reality, God's life, God's blessing, God's power for life and for joy and for peace. It's God's, it's sort of where God is. All right? And as we read the biblical story, especially when we read the Gospels, right, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is now. The kingdom of heaven is here, right? The whole plan, the whole purpose of heaven is not that heaven and earth are divided places, but that heaven and earth come together, that God and earth are one. This was what the temple was in Israel's story. The temple represents the place where heaven and earth meet. That was the significance of the temple, which is why it was so important that Jesus comes and says, I am the temple. Because now I am the place where heaven and earth meet. In other words, you don't have to go to the temple anymore. You can come to me. But then Jesus does something even more amazing. He says to us, we are the temple, the church. The church is now the place where heaven and earth come together. So if you want to experience heaven, you don't have to wait until you die. I mean, that's part of it. But if you want to experience heaven, we can experience it right now, today. How? By loving one another, and forgiving one another, and encouraging one another, and praying for one another, and having compassion for one another. All those things that Paul says we should put on. So when John sees an open door, one of the things I think we want to think about is, how open are the doors of our church? Are our church doors an open door, or are they closed? Do we keep people out, or do we invite people in to experience Jesus and to begin to experience the presence of God, which is here among us? We already saw this in the lampstands in chapter 1, right? Jesus is present in the church. Jesus isn't up there in heaven somewhere, right? Jesus is here among us, in our midst, in our hearts, in our lives. And our task as the church is to invite, to be an open door, right? To let people in to meet Jesus. Okay, see, this is what happens when I forget my sermon. I spend too much time on verse 1. So, after this, I looked, and look, in heaven, a door that stood open. And a voice says, "Come, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once, I was in the Spirit, and there in heaven, look, a throne. Here's the next image, right? So we have an open door. Now we have a throne. The throne is the master image in the book of Revelation. The image of the throne appears, I wrote it down, 62 times in the whole New Testament. 62 times we have the image of the throne. 47 of those 62 are in the book of Revelation. It is the number one image in Revelation, is the throne. Why? What does a throne mean? Right? A throne means power, right? It means authority. It means stability and order, right? A throne means that the world is not in chaos, but that there is, in fact, some kind of stability and order, right? And the throne is not empty, we find in chapter 4, right? There is one seated on the throne. Sometimes, I know, it doesn't seem that way when we look through our old glasses, right? Our world seems out of control, right? It seems like there's chaos everywhere, right? It seems like the ones who are really in charge, the ones who really have the power, are the Donald Trumps, or the Putins, right? Or the corporations, or the advertising companies who are trying to sell us stuff, right? Or Facebook, right? Which seems to control so much of our time. Right? That's what seems like is in control of the world. But when we put on sort of the glasses of Revelation, it's almost like what you see is not what you get. That's an English phrase. What you see is what you get. In other words, whatever you see, that's all there is. Right? But the book of Revelation says, no, there's more. There's something behind what you see. And behind what you see is God on the throne. However out of control life seems, however chaotic the world seems, God is still on the throne. God is in control. Even when it doesn't feel like it. And what else does John see besides the throne with God on it? He sees a rainbow. Now, what do you think of when you hear about a rainbow?
Reading.
What comes to mind? Oh, reading rainbow. Yeah, that's true. Then I think of Star Trek. Okay, that's a whole different. What do you think of when you see a rainbow? What comes to your mind?
7 color.
Okay, color. Good. There it is. Noah. Anyone familiar with the story of Noah? The story of the flood, right? Genesis 6 through 8. This is our Old Testament ears. We have to put on our Old Testament ears, right? What does the rainbow mean?
God's promise to the earth.
Yes, it's a promise that God will never destroy the earth with a flood. But I think we can read from that God will never destroy the earth. Mm-hmm. That's really important as we go through the rest of the book of Revelation, because sometimes it's going to look like things are really bad. But we have to keep the rainbow in mind that John sees around the throne. Right? The rainbow that signifies that however bad things seem, God is not, this earth, this world, is not going to be destroyed. It's not. It's going to be renewed, but it's not going to be destroyed. God doesn't make trash. Right? I don't want to be too critical, but every time we sing that verse, the earth will soon dissolve like snow. I'm like, no, it won't. And the sun refused to shine. No, that's bad theology. Right? The earth is going to last for as long as God lasts, because God doesn't make junk. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead to Revelation 22. So he sees a rainbow. What else does he see? He sees 24 thrones. Look, there's thrones. Right? What kind of power does God have? God is not authoritarian. Right? God is not a tyrant. God shares power. 12 may be the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. In other words, all of God's people are called to reign, to rule with God, to rule with Christ over creation. That goes all the way back to Genesis 1, when God said to Adam and Eve, have dominion. That command has never been taken away. So in this new heaven and in this new earth that we are anticipating, humans will still be having dominion. Not in a negative way, not in a tyrant, authoritarian, violent way, but in a way that leads to shalom and to flourishing. Right? 24 thrones. What else does John see? Look, coming from the throne are flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. Well, if we're listening with Old Testament ears, what are we hearing there? We already have Noah.
What you just read in Ezekiel.
It's in Ezekiel, but Ezekiel also is looking back somewhere. I hear Gabriel whispering it in the back, hoping someone will pick up on what he's saying.
He can just say it louder, Moses.
Thank you, yes. It's Moses. It's Mount Sinai. Right? When Israel met God and God made the covenant with them at Mount Sinai, that was the images that they saw. Flashes of lightning, peals of thunder. Right? So we're supposed to be hearing Exodus. And Exodus is all about God coming and delivering us from slavery. Right? So this God who sits on the throne is that image of flashes of lightning and thunder is going to show up 3 more times in the book of Revelation. So you can keep your ears and eyes out for it. And look, 7 flaming torches, which are the 7 spirits of God. Well, we already know what 7 means, right? In the book of Revelation, it's symbolic, right? A number representing wholeness, completion, perfection, right? I think that this is the Holy Spirit that John is seeing, right? We've already seen God the Father on the throne. In chapter 5, we're going to see the Lamb. And in between, as a kind of mediating, is the Spirit of God, right? Who is fully present with God and present with us, right? Present with the churches. The Spirit moves among the churches. And look, a sea of glass like crystal. Israel was not seafaring people. They didn't have big ships like the Phoenicians or the Romans, right? They didn't travel out to sea. They stayed close to shore in their fishing boats, right? Because for many people in the ancient world, the sea represented chaos and death and disorder. It was untamable, right? A storm would blow up and it would do so much, like a typhoon that we get here. Suddenly, the sea is out of control, right? And we have to prepare our lives, right, to make sure that no damage happens, right? In Genesis, God separates the land from the sea, right, as a symbolic way of saying the waters of chaos can only come so far, and then they will stop. Here, the sea has become like glass. God has tamed and calmed the sea. That thing that caused so much fear and disorder, like a sudden guitar cranking out in the middle of a sermon, right? That becomes like glass. It becomes tamed, right? No more reason to fear. All those things that cause us anxiety and worry and despair, right? Including death, which is the big one, right? The sea is often equated with death, is tamed and made calm, right? Later in the book, we're going to see that there is no sea at all in the new heaven and the new earth, right? Because that image of chaos and disorientation is removed. Okay, I got to get going here because we're... okay, so, and then this is another big one, I think, and this is partly what I think this whole chapter 4 is about. What do you see? I see 4 living creatures. I think chapter 4 and chapter 5 go together, actually, in the book of Revelation. So Gabriel's going to do chapter 5 next week. So here we have 4 living creatures, right? And do you remember what the number 4 represents in Revelation? So 7 represents wholeness or completion, and 7 is made up of 4 and 3, and 3 represents, it's God's number, and 4 is the number of creation, right? And look at the faces of the 4 living creatures. An ox, which is domesticated animals. A lion, which is wild, undomesticated animals. The eagle, which are birds, and humans. In other words, in my opinion, I don't think these 4 living creatures are actual creatures. I don't think we're ever going to see these things. I think they're all symbol. They symbolize creation itself, right? I think they have the same role in Ezekiel, who also sees 4 living creatures, right? So what John is seeing in the throne room is an image or a symbol of creation itself. And what do these 4 living creatures do in Revelation chapter 4? What do the creatures do?
Praising God.
Yes, they worship. They worship. And as a result, in response of their worship, the 24 elders worship. In other words, this whole vision is really about worship. And I think what we are seeing here is God's view of reality, of true reality. And that view is that all of existence is created for one purpose, and that's to worship and glorify God. This, what John is seeing, is the end, the purpose, the telos of existence. You know, the Westminster Catechism starts with this question: what is the chief end of humans? And the answer is, the chief end of humans is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I would expand that question to say not is what is the chief end of humans, but what is the chief end of all of reality, all of creation? It's to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. This matters. In the Old Testament, there's another way of putting it, right? That the whole earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. It happens in Isaiah, it happens in Habakkuk, right? That's the goal of all of life. Why does that matter? Why does that matter? Well, for two reasons, I think. One, well, I guess I've already said it. Right? One reason is because that is the goal of creation, is to worship the Creator. Right? And so what this vision is saying is that goal is going to happen. It's inevitable. No matter how chaotic, no matter how sinful, no matter how evil, no matter how scary and anxious, no matter how terrible the world is at the moment, when we put on the glasses of Revelation, we see that in the end, everything will be worshiping and glorifying God. So we can hope, and we can wait, and we can not be anxious about tomorrow, because we've just been given a vision of tomorrow. And that vision is God wins. And we all will worship, not worship, partly worship like we're worshiping here, but that all of our life will be worship. The model for Goshen University is Coram Deo. It's Latin for before the face of God. Every part of our lives will be lived before the face of God. Whether it's teaching, or gardening, or engineering, all of the activities that we do as a species will be geared toward glorifying God. That's the end game. That's where we're headed. And we have the privilege of being able to start today with our lives. The other thing is, because we have so many other stories that are distracting us from acknowledging God, that are stealing our hearts away from God, that are turning, like some of the churches we saw, right? The church to Ephesus, forsaking our first love, right? The act of worship is an act of reorientation, right? The act of worship is us coming back to God and acknowledging that we are not God, that God is God. So when we worship, we tell ourselves, but we also tell the world who watches us worship, that there is something more to life than me, and more to life than us. And in our worship, we are reminded of God, and who God is, and what God has done for us. And so that's why Sunday morning worship is so important, and why, in a way, only doing it once a week is probably not enough, right? But that when we come together on Sunday, in this case afternoon, and we worship together, it's like God is once again turning our hearts back to Him, back to Jesus. Right? So that becomes a very important aspect of. So what this text is doing in chapter 4, right, is it's giving us a picture, an image, a vision of God's reality. And that reality has two purposes. One, it's to reorient our lives and our hearts back toward Jesus. And it's to give us hope that in the end, all of creation, all of reality, all of existence will be kneeling before God in worship. Amen. Let's pray together.